I think there actually is a hard-nosed strategic argument that we can make for why we should care about Israel too. Let me just make a couple of points on that topic. So first, Israel is one of the most dynamic, certainly on a per capita basis, one of the most dynamic and technologically advanced countries in the world. Dan Senor wrote about this in the book, The Startup Nation. And if you look at what Israel is doing just with the Iron Beam system, for example, this is a system that would allow America and our allies to actually achieve some parity with the people who are sending drones and rocket attacks and so forth. There is no way that we can long-term fight a missile defense battle against people if they're paying 1/10 or 1/100th for offensive weapons that we are paying for defensive weapons. And the Israelis are doing the most important work to actually give us missile defense parity. That's a very important national security objective of the United States of America. And that's something we're working with one of the most innovative economies in the world to accomplish. There's another reason, actually, motivated by my view that America can't do everything. And that reason is quite simple. We have to sort of ask ourselves, what do we want out of our Israeli allies? And more importantly, what do we want out of all of our allies writ large? Do we want clients who depend on us, who can't do anything without us? Or do we want real allies who can actually advance their interests on their own, with America as playing a leadership role, but our allies actually doing something too? So my biggest criticism of our approach in Ukraine is that it has no strategic end in sight, and it's not leading anywhere that's going to ultimately be good for our country. But the second biggest criticism I make about the war in Ukraine and our approach to it is that we are subsidizing the Europeans to do nothing. The Europeans are not carrying their fair share of the burden, especially when it comes in provision of weapons, and they're deindustrializing their own country at the same time that they say that Putin must be defeated at all costs. If Putin must be defeated at all costs, to our German friends, then stop deindustrializing your own country in the name of a ridiculous green energy policy. But I actually think that Washington, at least current Washington leadership, really likes the fact that the Europeans are completely dependent on us. That's not an alliance. These people aren't increasingly allies. They are client states of the United States of America who do whatever we want them to do. Well, I think we have a real opportunity to ensure that Israel is an ally in the true sense, that it's going to pursue their interests, and sometimes those interests won't totally overlap with the United States, and that's totally reasonable, but they are fundamentally self-sufficient. And I think the way that we get there in Israel is actually by combining the Abraham Accords approach with the defeat of Hamas that gets us to a place where Israel and the Sunni nations can play a regional counterweight to Iran. Again, we don't want a broader regional war. We don't want to get involved in a broader regional war. The best way to do that is to ensure that Israel, with the Sunni nations, can actually police their own region of the world. And that allows us to spend less time and less resources on the Middle East and focus more on East Asia. In the same way that we want our own allies to do the job in Europe so that we can focus on East Asia, I think that the same is true of the Sunni nations in Israel and the Middle East. We want to focus more on East Asia, so they're going to have to pick up more of the regional security apparatus. But they can't do that. The Israelis can't do that unless they defeat Hamas. There's an interesting thing, which is why we should be supporting them in the war to finish Hamas's military capabilities. And one of the things that's frankly reasonable that people say, though I think that it's wrong, is, well, you can't possibly defeat Hamas. It's an ideology. Well, you can't defeat Islamic radicalism as an ideology, and it was stupid for us to build democracies in the Middle East to try, but you can defeat ISIS as a functioning military apparatus. You can defeat Al-Qaeda as a functioning military apparatus, and there is no way for the Abraham Accords to take off, which allows us to step away from the Middle East unless Israel defeats Hamas as a functional military apparatus and builds some real alliances with the Sunni states. That, to me, is the goal of American foreign policy in the Middle East, and that's why we should be doing something much different, in my view, in Israel than we should be in Ukraine. Now, maybe you disagree with that. Happy to have that conversation, but that's fundamentally how I think about this. How do we focus on East Asia?